Chapter 31. I Am the Darkness. A roar like an angry lion echoed through Ravenloft. Navarra's face scrunched up as she braced herself for the Count's wrath. "Everyone to the throne room, now!" Strahd's voice boomed in her mind. Navarra took one last look at the sun and flew down from the high tower's peak, back to her bedroom. Gostamir had told her the night before that all the fanes were consecrated, and she had woken up extra early to watch the sunrise. Having already dressed and primped herself, Navarra hurried out the bedroom door. Her blue dress from Harrington, which she had found in her bedroom closet, swished as she ran down the stairs. She slowed when she reached the second floor and serenely walked into the throne room. Anastasia, Escher, Gertruda, Valenta, and Rahadin were standing in the middle of the room, looking up at the backward-facing throne. "Valenta?" Unseen, Strahd's voice came from the seat of the throne. "Step forward." The vampire consort with the half-skull mask walked to the foot of the dais. Navarra watched, wondering what was about to happen. "Whom did I entrust with guarding Yester Hill?" Strahd asked. There was a murmur. "Speak up!" Strahd yelled.
Me, my lord,"
said Valenta. She was visibly trembling. Strahd rose from his throne, turned around, and slowly advanced on her. The entire room grew dark, as a shadow followed in his train. He had a wooden stake in his hand. "Yes, Valenta, it was you," he said.
"But, my lord, the Druids were supposed to—"
"Do not speak to me of what the Druids were supposed to do. Did I charge this task to the Druids? Did I put my entire army at the disposal of the Druids? Answer me."
No, my lord."
"You disgust me."
He threw the wooden stake at her feet. Valenta fell to her knees, sobbing and shaking from head to foot.
"Please, my lord, please."
"Take it."
Strahd's words were dripping with venom. She picked up the stake.
Please, have mercy."
"Since when have I ever shown mercy?"
Tears fell down Valenta's chin.
"Do it,"
Strahd said. Valenta pointed the sharp end of the stake at her own chest. She looked up once more at her master, as though hoping to see some shred of pity in his face. Then she plunged the deadly tip into her heart. Navarra closed her eyes. There was a scream, followed by a gurgling moan, and a moment later Navarra heard the body slump to the floor.
"Rahadin," Strahd said, "take care of this mess. The rest of you get out of my sight."
Navarra heard the others walk past her, and when she opened her eyes, everyone else but Strahd was gone. The vampire was sitting on his throne again. "Did your big ears not hear me?" Strahd asked. There was an edge in his voice. Navarra's heart pounded. She needed to get out. She needed to get out. She needed to help her friends. Navarra forced her feet to move toward him. One step, then another, until she walked up the dais. What was she doing? She was going to die, but she had to do it. She had to try. Holding her breath, she reached out and touched his arm. His muscles were as tense as his voice. Would he break her hand? Snap her fingers one by one? He just kept staring at the wall. Navarra waited. After a long time he said, "Would you have preferred I gave her mercy?" Navarra swallowed.
"I think killing her was a form of mercy."
She remembered Van Richten's son, a vampire spawn, begging his father to end his life. At least in death the soul had a chance for peace.
"What will you do?"
Navarra asked, keeping her hand on his arm. "I will go to the Amber Temple. It is high time I had a talk with Mother Night." Navarra's eyes went wide.
"Keithlin."
I have a task for her."
"What task is that?"
Strahd's eyes flashed at Navarra, and she froze like a deer being stalked by a wolf. "I will tell you if you agree to become my warlock. In fact, I will take you with me to the Amber Temple, where we can make our pact. It is where I made mine."
"With the dark powers?"
"With Vampire. He is only one of the dark powers."
"And what role did Keithlin play?"
"She is the one who brokered the pact. Yes, it was Keithlin of the Crooked Teeth who brought me to the Amber Temple and showed me the power within when I was searching for answers. I'm glad, Navarra, that you never took Irina there. The dark powers want her dead." Keithlin. Navarra's fear turned to hatred. She should have known that Keithlin was at the bottom of all this. That hag was responsible for Strahd's corruption, and she had done it in more ways than one. It was Keithlin who had imbued her daughter Lysaga with evil, and it was Lysaga who had passed that evil magic onto Strahd when he was only an infant. Now Navarra was discovering that Keithlin had also introduced Strahd to Vampire. Barovia was cursed because of Keithlin. Deep down, Navarra knew that Keithlin was not the only one to blame, but those thoughts were overshadowed by her compassion for Strahd.
"Please,"
Navarra said, not with desperation but with concern.
"Please don't go to the Amber Temple. Don't have dealings with Keithlin any longer."
"She is a mad crone these days, but there is still one thing she can do for me."
"Don't go to her. I beg you. Your soul is already in peril as it is. Asking anything from her will only further enslave you to the dark powers."
"Who do you think I am?"
Strahd stood, his voice cold and threatening. Navarra took a step back.
"Clearly you are confused. I am beholden to no one. No one. Mother Night is a drivelling wretch who begs for crumbs at my feet. Vampire is nothing but a phantom without the strength of my hand. And the dark powers bend to my will. I hold the keys of life and death in Barovia. Your patron tells you stories about a noble prince enchanted by a hag and held captive by darkness. And you think that of me? No, Navarra. I am the darkness. I am the terror that stalks in the night. I am the only thing that should be feared in this valley. I am the ancient. I am the land."
His last words echoed off the bare walls until the room fell silent. Strahd sat back down and gripped the armrests with his black-clawed hands. Navarra stared down at her feet, her fingers clasped together, sweating. Finally she said,
"You're right, Strahd. The only one you have to fear is yourself."
Then she stepped off the dais and got halfway across the room before stopping and looking back. It would have been easier to walk away, but she could not leave her friends at the mercy of Strahd's machinations. She needed to try harder. Navarra closed her eyes and said,
"Before you go to the Amber Temple, would you stay here with me, just for the day?"
Strahd and Navarra walked arm in arm to the balcony that overlooked the chapel. When they gazed down at the neglected sanctuary, Strahd gave a disapproving growl. The stained glass windows, though dim, were casting morning sunlight onto the floors. This room faced eastward.
"Why don't you show me something else?"
Navarra asked. "You have already seen the castle, and I can't go outside. What else is there to show?"
"We could go to the dungeons."
Strahd sneered. "You would ask. No, they are still off limits." He gripped the railing of the balcony and yawned. "This is a waste of time, Navarra. I should be going." She bit her lip and tried to think.
What would I do to cheer up a friend?
"Come with me," she said, taking Strahd's hand. "Where are we going?" he asked, as she led him down the stairs. She led him all the way to the great hall, where they stopped in front of his pipe organ.
"Do you know the mutineers' shanty?"
Navarra asked, and climbed onto the dining table. Strahd rolled his eyes. "That old song? It was around when my parents were young."
"Well, there's been a revival of it, and it's a big hit with the new dance. Play it," she said,
remembering how Vasily ate up any fashionable news from the outside world. She lifted her dress, tapping her toe and heel on the table, slowly at first, then picking up the tempo.
"I'll show you the dance, if you can keep up."
Strahd cracked his knuckles, sat at the bench, and struck the keys. The bellow of the pipes gave the drinking song a more exalted sound. Navarra sang as she danced, faster and faster, feeling the rhythm in her chest. Her feet rapped on the table as the swords on the walls came to life and danced around her. Strahd was animating them. She spun and clapped at the crescendo, and when the last note faded, she stopped, panting to catch her breath. A genuine smile had replaced Strahd's frown, and Navarra bowed. "Come with me," he said, holding out his hand. She hopped from the table and took his hand. Then Strahd pressed one of the organ's pedals with his foot. The entire instrument moved forward, giving way to a secret passage beyond. He led her through and brought her to what looked like an archer's post, with arrow slits in the walls. There was nothing in the room but mirrors, dozens of mirrors, abandoned and leaning against the walls. "I had all of these removed after I became what I am," Strahd said. "I got tired of passing them in the hallways and seeing nothing. Just another game the dark powers play to make me question whether I am really here at all." Strahd walked over to one of the mirrors and touched the dusty glass. "Sometimes I come here and think I catch a glimpse, a hand, a face, a flash of humanity. But it is only shadows playing tricks."
"I see you."
Navarra looked up at him. "You know, when we first met, you reminded me of another elf. A woman named Petrina. She was also different from others I have loved."
"What happened to her?"
"She was killed by her own people. The savages feared I would make her my spawn, so they murdered her. We were lovers for 12 years. Such a short time in the life of an elf, or a vampire." Navarra put her hands around his arm, unsure why Strahd had brought her here. In the many mirrors, it looked like her hands were resting on nothing at all. She turned her head and saw a passage leading to another corridor filled with cobwebs.
"What's down that way?"
"It is only a turret post. There is a passage beyond it that leads to the dungeons." Navarra rested her chin on his chest and looked up at him like a begging puppy. His red eyes looked down at her. "No," he said.
"But you would be with me. I wouldn't be going alone."
"Trust takes time, Navarra, and until you have mine fully, I cannot allow you to go down there."
"Is it true that Rowan's father is there?"
Strahd grimaced. "He is. Locked in a tomb. Metis is discovering what happens to those who betray my trust." Navarra focused on the pattern embroidered on his waistcoat.
"You must have trusted him enough to make him a full vampire."
"I loved him as my own blood. He was my family, my brother. Yes, I gave him my trust. But look what became of it, thrown back in my face as though he owed me nothing."
"Rowan had dreams about him."
Navarra wondered if Rowan had seen any more visions of her father.
"Did you really forbid Metis from being with Sariel?"
Metis began neglecting his duties almost as soon as he started seeing her. But it was after Petrina died that things became more problematic. I needed to punish those responsible. All the Dusk Elves had conspired to kill her, including her friend Sariel. so I banished half of them from my lands."
"All the elven women?"
Navarra had wondered why she had never seen any she-elves in Barovia. "It had to be done."
"And when you banished them, Sariel didn't leave? She stayed for Metis? And then, when you found her, you killed her?"
"She and Metis forced my hand."
"So Metis did love Sariel?"
"What does love have to do with it?"
"Oh, poor Metis."
"No, not poor Metis."
Strahd cut her off.
"A lord cannot maintain his throne if his vassals and retainers freely disobey him behind his back."
"Don't you see? You did to Metis what the dark powers have done to you, by forbidding him from the woman he loved."
"He betrayed me."
Strahd flicked his cape and paced back and forth, though the mirrors reflected none of it.
"He hid Sariel from me for years, lying to my face, after he knew the law I had decreed."
"He betrayed his own brother for love? Who does that sound like?"
Strahd stood still, clenching and unclenching his fists. Perhaps Navarra had said too much. She needed to buy the others time, not convince Strahd of his own sins. But couldn't she do both?
"I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you."
She walked over to him and lifted his hand to her lips.
"You speak your mind too much."
His tone was agitated, but he did not pull away.
"Let me draw a picture of you," she said. "I know you already have a marvelous portrait of yourself upstairs, but I can make a smaller one. You could bring it with you and take it out as often as you like. That way you won't need to see your reflection."
"I would like you to be in it," Strahd said.
"I could draw both of us if I take one of these."
She gestured at the mirrors.
"So I can sketch myself too."
Strahd allowed her to take one. When Navarra bent down to grab a small looking-glass, a larger one with a golden frame caught her eye. In its reflection she saw herself, but she was wearing a crown of ice, and snow was falling all around. Beside the gilded mirror there was another one, taller, with an ebony frame. In this one there was no snow, only darkness surrounding her, and she wore a spiked coronet with a black veil. Navarra shivered. Both reflections did the same. After Cyrus Bellevue brought her lunch in the great hall, Navarra convinced Strahd to play a game with her before she started on her drawing. Once again, she drew upon Strahd's magic to cast a spell, this time an illusion of disguise. Again, Strahd was amused she had found another material component. She and Strahd each disguised themselves to look like the other, and went throughout the castle tricking everyone to think that Navarra was Strahd and Strahd Navarra. The vampire roared with laughter each time the warlock imitated his mannerisms. It was all fun until they went to see the witches in the attic. Navarra, pretending to be Strahd, complained about how ugly Navarra was, and asked the witches to make her more attractive. When the crones poked and prodded the fake Navarra, saying she was far too ugly to be cured by one of their potions, the real Strahd flew into a rage. He kicked one of them and broke her neck. Even though Navarra had never liked the old harridans, she felt sick seeing the dead witch lying on the floor. When they left, Strahd assured Navarra that her loveliness surpassed even that of Sune the Resplendent, red-haired goddess of love and beauty. They turned back into themselves, and Navarra went to her bedroom to grab her journal and a drawing pencil, while Strahd waited in the lounge. The light in the rooms was dim, shaded by heavy drawn curtains, but Navarra could still see sunlight peeking through the cracks where the curtain met the floor.
"I'm glad you let me keep my journal," Navarra said, walking back into the lounge. "It's really been nice to—"
She dropped her pencil and gasped. "Where would you like me to pose?" Strahd stood with one hand on his hip. He was completely naked.
I, uh, um...
How did he undress so fast?
Don't be stupid, Navarra. Pick up your pencil.
In a moment that felt like an eternity, she bent down and tried to find where the pencil had rolled.
Where is it?
She briefly looked at Strahd.
Good gods.
She looked back down, and found it by the bookcase.
Get a hold of yourself, Navarra. Artists draw people in the nude all the time.
She cleared her throat and said in a high-pitched voice,
Have a seat.
Strahd sat on one of the plush chairs, his legs casually splayed apart. Navarra sat down across from him and flipped to a blank page. After setting up the small mirror on the table beside her, she started sketching an outline of the vampire. Her face was burning with embarrassment.
So, I was wondering,
she said, blurting out the first thing that came to mind.
Why is your throne turned backwards?
Strahd's head was tilted in a relaxed pose. It puts people in their place. When supplicants come to the court of the Count, I want them to know that they are little more than an afterthought to their lord.
But they're your people. You need to care about them. It's your job. And they're suffering.
I do what I must to maintain my patrimony, he said. Besides, I do not harm anyone unless they deserve it. Navarra thought about the hags, the werewolves, and the blights. And then there was Baron Vargas Vlakovich. Strahd could have put an end to him at any time.
But you let your people suffer. And what about that angel in Kresik? He wanted to mutilate Irina's face.
If that angel had tried to harm Irina in any way, I would have fed him to his own mongrel folk. But he is dead now, thanks to you.
Why didn't you take care of him sooner?
Because he was a reminder of how the holiest person can fall. Even an angel can be corrupted. So, he let an evil angel live to make himself feel justified.
It can happen the other way around, too, Navarra said. Even the most corrupt person can be made holy.
Strahd shook his head.
Still, said Navarra, you should show your people that you care. It's your responsibility.
For a lord it is better to be feared than to be loved. All men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous. Because of this they will follow a benevolent lord only so long as they think it to their advantage. As soon as the winds of misfortune blow, however, they will interpret clemency as weakness, and their love will turn to contempt. Fear preserves loyalty by a dread of punishment, but love only breeds treachery. Navarra started shading the feet and worked her way up.
Love doesn't do that, she said. There are ways to be firm as a ruler and still earn the love of your people. If we're talking about love, real love isn't fickle or false or any of those things. And it's certainly better than fear. Love is desiring goodness for another person. How can that ever be a bad thing? If we turn on each other, it's only because we turn our backs on love first.
Strahd tapped his fingers on the chair. How long will this drawing of yours take?
That depends on how good you want it to be.
Navarra showed him the sketch. It made him smile, as she knew it would. So far it was only the lower half of his body, and she had spared no anatomical detail. They talked the rest of the afternoon and into the evening, while Navarra drew. She even convinced herself that she was comfortable now with his state of undress. But when Strahd stood up, her face flushed again. "It is late," he said, before Navarra had finished the picture. He slipped into his trousers and put on his shirt.
"What shall we do now?"
Navarra asked. "Now I am going to the Amber Temple." Navarra's breaths grew short.
"Don't go. You could stay here for the evening."
"You and your little games have been fun, Navarra, but I must go. I have already put it off for too long. Henry must pay for his crimes. Navarra stood and rushed over to Strahd, leaving her journal and pencil behind. She could not let him go. She had to do something to save Henry. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfastened a button on Strahd's shirt. She unbuttoned another, and another, then paused and rested her forehead on his bare chest.
"Please stay."
She said it so quietly that she could scarcely hear it over the pounding of her heart. Strahd put his arms around her. "You really want me to stay?" She kissed his chest, then looked up at him and moved her hair to one side, leaving her neck exposed. He gave her a quizzical look.
"I want you to bite me."
Her voice was soft but resolute. Strahd's pupils dilated, and his breath rolled over her cheek. "Are you sure?" Navarra nodded yes, and braced herself. With one hand on her waist and the other on her head, Strahd tilted back her slender frame. He kissed her neck, his lips cold on her flesh. Then he bit. Navarra clenched her eyes. Strahd pressed their bodies together as his fangs sank in deep. He drank until Navarra felt dizzy. The image of a lifeless Gertruda being tossed aside crossed her mind. And just when she thought this might be the end, his jaws released. The vampire threw his head back and sighed. A trickle of blood ran down onto Navarra's collarbone. "Oh, sweet Navarra." His voice was deep and ravenous. Then he scooped her up in his arms and carried her all the way to the courtyard, where he summoned Bucephalus. They rode off into the night, the cold wind nipping at Navarra's face. The waning gibbous moon shone with an eerie glow, and the stars were like small beads in a sea of blackness. Bucephalus cantered to a hill overlooking the castle, where Strahd hopped down and lifted Navarra from the saddle. He spun her once around before setting her to her feet and kissing her lips. She was engulfed by his embrace, and they fell to the grass, kissing each other fiercely. Navarra shivered as she felt Strahd's teeth digging into her neck once again. He bit her over and over, and though the bites were not terribly painful, each time she would bury her face in his hair and try to focus on something else. She began to feel giddy, as if she had been drinking too much wine. Her head spun, and she had the constant feeling that she was falling, though she was already on the ground.
"Maybe we could,"
Navarra said with a slur.
"More kissing and less,
Strahd bit her again.
That tickles."
Navarra giggled and pushed him away.
"How about I dance?"
It was hard to stand up. Her body felt weak, and it was shaking uncontrollably.
"Stupid legs,"
Navarra said, again trying to stand.
"I, Navarra of Harrington, will dance by the moon."
She stood up for a moment. Then everything went black. Navarra felt warm. Her body was still trembling, but she was cradled in strong arms, and a warm cheek was pressed against her forehead. Comforting. She had fainted.
"Gostamere?"
Navarra thought. She opened her eyes to see Strahd rocking her.
"Strahd,"
Navarra said, nuzzling herself into him.
"Thank goodness you're here. There was a vampire trying to kill me."
She pointed to the distance, but could not tell if she was being clear. Everything was a blur. Strahd mumbled something in her ear, and she caught a few words. "Never hurt you. Keep you safe. You're more to me than... I promise." Navarra tried keeping her eyes open, but she was so weak. They closed. She felt herself being lifted and carried. Somehow, whether by horseback or by a spell, they made it back to the castle, because eventually she found herself in her own bed. A pillow was tucked under her head, and blankets were pulled up to her shoulders. Gentle hands stroked her hair, and soft lips brushed across her cheek. Though she was exhausted, it was hard to fall asleep, and for a while she lingered somewhere between sleeping and waking. At some point, she thought she heard tapping at the window, but by then sleep was finally overtaking her.